Hi.
Good evening.
How are you?
Good evening, Francisco. Happy New Year.
Hello, everyone. We'll get started in a few minutes. Happy New Year to everyone as well. Well, it's 7 o'clock, or excuse me, it's 6 o'clock now. You start a meeting starting at 7. But let's wait a couple of minutes to give folks an opportunity to join us.
Okay. And Francisco, just so you know, I don't know if it got passed on to you. Chuck Sheehan won't be able to join tonight. He's got the flu that's going around.
Okay, all right. And I know Clifton's on vacation, so we've got a bit of a skeleton crew, but we'll get it done. All right, we're a couple minutes past, so Ryan, I'm not sure if you want to get this meeting started. We've got a pretty good crowd, so.
Yeah, go ahead here. Thank you, Francisco. So this is a virtual meeting for January 9th, or pardon me, January 8th. The Town of Stonington zoning rewrites. See here, we have, as far as PNC members, we have Lynn, Alyssa, Gary, Bennett, and Mary Ellen. So I think we can go ahead and get started. Francisco.
All right, thank you very much. All right, we've got a very straightforward agenda, and this material should all look very familiar to you because we've spent the past couple of meetings slowly working our way through it. I'll just revisit the project schedule to orient us as to where we are. And very fortunately, and thank you all for conducting this extra meeting this month. It's going to help us maintain our schedule and to some extent get back on schedule. And we'll spend a bulk of our meeting reviewing the commercial mixed use and industrial district. Recommended amendments, we'll talk about things that we will not advance, things that we've agreed to advance, and things that still require discussion that we haven't had a chance to thoroughly review in prior meetings. And then, as usual, we'll conclude with our next steps and our next meeting date. So our schedule, we're still aiming to get a bulk of our work finished before summer. And I think that's still a reasonable schedule to keep. And I appreciate the flexibility of this extra meeting this month. And if we need to have an extra meeting in the future in order to maintain this schedule, I'm certainly willing to do that as well. All right, well, let's start with the recommendations that at our last or prior meetings, we agreed that we did not want to advance. So we can set those to the side. At our last meeting, we reviewed permit requirements, and we had made a lot of recommendations for potentially reducing special use permit requirements to a site plan application requirement for various uses across zones. And the only consensus that we had on this was to reduce the special use permit requirement in the PV5 for microbreweries and brew pubs and laundromats. And presumably this fulfills someone's campaign promise to make it easier for people to do their laundry and get a beer while the clothes are in the dryer. So that's where we landed. And to that effect, we've decided that that's the only aspect that will move forward, and we'll leave all the recommendations behind. Okay. We had also recommended modifying the threshold for special permits. Currently there's a threshold of 5,000 square feet for banks, office buildings, and mixed use residential. Any use in excess of 5,000 square feet requires a special use permit, and we recommended either removing that threshold entirely or increasing it to 10,000 square feet. And there was a lot of concern about changing this and a desire to maintain it as it is. So we are going to leave this one on the cutting room floor. All right, and I'll take I'll pause briefly after each of these in case someone wants to interject if they recall our discussion differently. Otherwise, I'll assume we're all on the same page and we can move forward. The next item is parking as a principal use. This was brought to it's not something that FHI had initiated or recommended. It was brought to our attention by Clifton as something that should be considered. And Clifton has since followed up with the first selectwoman, and they has decided, in coordination with her, has decided that this might not be a good idea. And so we will not advance off-street parking as a principal use. That, of course, is allowed as an accessory to a principal use, but we're not going to allow parking lots as a standalone use on a piece of property. As they are not currently allowed. Right, we had a fairly lengthy discussion about outdoor vendors with a lot of concern about their operations and any expansion to an outdoor vendor's operation. We had also talked about expanding the definition to make sure it was inclusive of prepared foods, of which it is not. The definition does not specifically identify prepared foods as a permitted function of an outdoor vendor. The vendors are only allowed in the GC 60 and TC 80. And so we had a lot of pushback on the idea about expanding that to allow vendors, outdoor vendors in other zones. So we're going to leave those outdoor vendors permitted only in the GC 60 and TC 80 by special use permit, as is currently allowed, and will not recommend allowing outdoor vending in any other zone, and will not amend the definition to be inclusive of outdoor food vending.
Are we going to talk later on about the possibility of putting this as an accessory use?
Yeah, we can. We can. In fact, let's discuss that right now because I don't have another slide to address that idea.
Okay, because that's what
Alyssa,
I just
yeah.
sent a note to Clifton after our meeting, you know, because I
Yeah.
wouldn't be adverse to coming up with some as an accessory. I'd like to
Yeah.
talk about it a little bit. Like I don't know if I'm adverse to it, but I think that it is more applicable as an accessory use than as a principal use. And I'd
Right.
need to see how that might look
Okay.
and what zones that might be in. But
Yeah.
I just thought we should throw that out because I know that was in one of the slides from the last presentation, but we never got to that
Mhm.
slide.
Yeah.
And wanted to hear what people thought about that.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit now. So as an accessory use, are we still not interested in having food, the sale of food, prepared foods be part of that?
I'm actually okay with it as an accessory use in some zones, but would
Yeah.
have to figure out how that would work and what that regulation might look like. I mean, there are,
Yeah,
you know, with keeping this.
As an accessory use, this is Ryan. I think it would make sense again to Alyssa's point in some zones.
This is Lynn, though we would want to make sure that we were allowed to put a time limitation on the accessory use.
Lynn, if I could just pause you for a minute. We've had this issue before with your microphone. Yeah, I believe you probably dialed in as well. So you need to mute the microphone on your computer if you also dialed in from your phone.
Got it.
Perfect. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead.
So, you know, if we were to approve it as an accessory use, I think we'd want to make sure that we can limit the time. In other words, put dates around when it could be used as an accessory use.
So both time of year and I would imagine time of day?
Yep, and maybe dates, maybe, you know, 2 dates, you know, a start date and a finish date type thing.
Yep.
And I'd want something on the percentage of the lot that they can use as this accessory use. You know, I don't want them to have like a tiny shack as the principal and then, you know, most of it is this.
Right.
My big concern with this, when I started thinking about the outdoor vending thing, is that, you know, like the one on Route 1 where they're putting in the 3 things, where you're basically taking a commercial lot. It's taxed now as a vacant lot, but it's a commercial lot that really has a business on it. But we're not seeing any revenue from that business. And so you're taking away the potential of it actually being a store ever by allowing these trucks and getting any kind of, you know, increasing the grand list and all that sort of stuff. And that's when I started thinking about this. And I think that's my big issue with having basically a paved lot with no building. So it's taxed as a vacant lot, but there are three
Right.
trucks who are now generating income and working as a business, but we're not getting any business taxes unless the
Mm.
trucks are registered in Stonington and that, right? But who
Right.
knows where they're registered? And so that's my concern. So I'd like to see it as like maybe, I don't know, some percentage of the principal use.
Okay, okay. Um, what, in addition to the GC 60 and TC 80, where presumably you'd be receptive to it as an accessory use, what other zones do
None of
people
the
feel
not
it
none of
could?
the fives, they're too small.
Yeah, yeah.
Not
Um,
manufacturing, not industrial. Depending, I would think about the HI 60 depending on how we redo the HI 60. I mean, like we need to work on the HI 60 before I think about putting it there, but right now I'm okay with it in
mhm.
GC and TC.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on that?
I think it's a good
I
place
gue-
to start.
Yeah.
Okay. So by permitting it as an accessory use, are we at the same time having conversation about prohibiting it as a principal use?
Well, it's not going to be allowed as a principal use.
Well,
Oh, you mean
Yeah,
take it
I
out
would
as a
not be
principal
in
use?
favor of it ever being allowed as a
well, it is.
principal use.
Oh, but changing that totally to take that out, I do not like it as a principal use ever. So I would, if we can, I mean, I would definitely take it out as a special use permit in those zones and allow it only as an accessory use. For the
I,
reasons I said before.
I think that the approach of removing this as a principal use, it becomes a much easier sell if we then allow it as an accessory use.
Yeah, I would rather do that. Let's do
That
that.
way you could potentially take someone who's established in a particular area, and while they would have to find another lot, they could still maintain their business operations in that area or along that corridor. They would just need to find another lot that has a principal use.
But the ones that are already approved that are going in now, that
Well,
they're already done, right? That's a done
yeah,
deal.
yeah.
They'd be
So
just become non-conforming
right,
or whatever
they would
right.
become non-conforming. I need to follow up with Clifton on the details of their permit, whether or not it's something that has to be reissued. Like it sometimes these are seasonal permits. They're
I don't think, yeah. But that
um,
is the only one, right? Right now that is
Yeah, I
is
wouldn't
there
want to
another?
make it, I wouldn't want to kind of put people who already have it and I know of the one we approved, kind of put them in a bad position.
Oh yeah, no, they were approved under the zoning, and
We
I
need
would
to
let
check
them
with
be
Clifton on. Yeah,
yeah,
like
Yeah,
let them
we
be
just don't want to
non-conforming,
expand it.
right?
yeah,
And I
and
would
I'm
and I
Bottom
fine
would
with
line,
like
that. I
to
just
take it
wouldn't
out.
also inadvertently kind of penalize somebody who already has it.
okay, okay, okay. All right. So we're agreed to prohibit outdoor vending as a principal use in the GC 60 TC 80, but allow it instead as an accessory use. And then add some standards surrounding time of year, start date, end date, time of day, share of lot, and some other controls as necessary. Correct?
Exactly.
Yep,
Exactly.
Yeah,
that's
but
correct.
I want to be very specific when we say time of year. So it might
Mm,
be just a weekend. It's not necessarily summer, fall. It could be that there's just, a long weekend involved, some kind of other thing going on this is going to be a great accessory use at that time. Um, but I don't want any pushback if somebody comes forward and we say, okay, you can have it for 2 days, and they say, no, you can't put that kind of a time limitation on it.
What
So
does Old Mystic Village do when they have their food truck festival? Do they get a permit from who?
I
Because that
honestly
will
don't
be
know.
that's sort of like what this would be,
mm.
kind of, right? Is what you're saying. And they have
Yes.
Yeah,
that in whatever.
in which case we're talking about a temporary use, which it's a little more like a tag sale or something else that requires some form of approval, but it's only temporary in nature. So that's a little different than what we're talking about, which suggests a use that's permitted throughout the season under certain conditions. So do I also understand there's desire to regulate outdoor vending, to be able to regulate it on a temporary basis and allow it only on a temporary basis, such as a long weekend or something?
We must do that somehow in town. Someone should look
Yeah.
into that. Somehow in town that happens now.
Mhm,
Because
mhm.
there are places
I'm not sure if
you know,
it
like I
does
said,
happen now in that sense. I'd like to get a little more information on that. That seems to me really restrictive, almost prohibitively so.
like I said, I mean, the Old
I'd
Mystic
like to
Village
get some
has
more
a food
information
truck,
around it.
right? They have the food truck festival for a weekend. So how does that work? How are they permitted to do that then?
That's what I'd like to understand before.
Yeah, so how it's permitted. I mean, they get a permit from somebody, whether it's the police
Yeah,
department or
yeah,
somebody to do
right.
that. I actually like limiting it by season. I think that's self-driving on the outdoor vendor part. You know, self-driven. I think they're not going to be out there on a day like today. They're not going to get any business. But, you know, we can talk about that as well.
Okay, I can follow up with Clifton and Candace on how those temporary, pop-up type events are handled with respect to permitting. Okay.
And Francisco, I have to apologize, but I have to ask you to go back to the brewery.
Yes.
There was a citizen that came forward at the last planning and zoning meeting, kind of to bring up that topic, and they reminded the board that there had been substantial discussions previously about microbreweries, et cetera, and where they would be located. And one of the key factors, or the primary factor for driving it forward, for not having it allowable in various places, was because of the smells associated with the brewing process. So I don't know if other board members remember that conversation, but I do want to bring it forward just to make sure that we've addressed this at this point, if we think that is something that needs to be thought through a little bit more since our last
This is Ryan.
virtual meeting.
This is Ryan. I do recall it. I believe Carlene brought it up.
Yeah, I think it was Carlene, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I do, when she mentioned it, I do remember in the past when we've talked about these microbreweries, that has been a consideration, a concern of the public. I'm not familiar with the brewing process, et cetera, but it has in the past limited where that brewing process could take place. So, I'm just bringing it forward. It's something I want to make sure that we've thought it through. We wouldn't want this next to somebody's home, as an example. If it was on the edge of a commercial zone or next mixed commercial zone. So, I think that's an important thing to think about.
Okay. It's also possible for us to introduce standards that require any microbrewery to be a specified distance from the nearest dwelling unit.
That's a good idea. I think we should look into that.
Yeah. And is there some kind of a standard we can put in about odor?
That gets difficult to regulate because
I was going to say.
That sort of performance standard is regulated primarily by the state, and it's difficult for the town to monitor and enforce.
Okay.
Let's look at how that might look in terms of some buffering.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. And again, I'm sorry I had to go back to that.
No, it's fine. It's fine. In fact, we're gonna touch upon this again, so it's no trouble. That's why we're here. All right. That gets us caught up to outdoor vending, and I think I understand the direction you want to go, so I got that. So let's talk about the recommendations that we agreed upon at our last meeting. We've since documented those. We put those into memorandum format, which I believe has been distributed to all of you. And we have 4 of them. I'll go through them one by one. The first surrounds the Alpha Avenue area,
Yeah, we
the
need to talk about this
DB5.
one.
Yeah. I've got several slides to support this discussion, so I've got more than just this. In summary, we have an existing LS5 that, for the most part, it mostly covers a town, Como property and a couple other commercial properties. We have Como properties and town properties, and mostly in the RM20, a small lot in the R80. And then we have a DB5 area that is really not consistent with the purpose of the DB5 zone, which is in Mystic near the water and is much more densely developed. It really looks a lot more like what we allow in the LS5. So it made sense to convert that to an LS5 and essentially merge it into or connect it to the existing LS5. So those are the recommendations that we've developed, which is to convert this entire area into the LS5. Clifton had advised us to include the Como properties, which is why we show it within that thick dark boundary. As a reminder, the southern part of this is the boundary of the zone, abuts the boroughs, the borough boundary, which is why it cuts across some properties. So this is the recommendation we put in front of you, and I'd like to open it up to any comments or questions.
Yeah, I have a bunch of comments about this one.
Yeah, sure.
And I think I sent my comments to Clifton, and I don't know if that's what prompted your other slides, but
Yeah,
the
it
LS5
did.
going up
Correct.
to the northeast there, that's not the town property, the town highway garage is not an LS5 zone. It's RM20. And that's not the real property line. And it's a weird I saw it in one of your other slides. It's a weird triangle lot. It's where the gas station is. And I'd like to keep that. I'd like to keep the entire town property residential and
Yep.
follow property lines, not cut that property in half like you're showing there.
So we're showing the boundaries of the existing LS5, and the existing LS5 does in fact cut the property in half.
Yeah, so I'd like to. So I was just looking at when I was clicking on it, I wasn't clicking on the zoning. I was clicking on the lot designation. But
yeah,
I'd like
so
to
if you click on the lot, it shows it as RM20, and that's because I think because a majority of it is RM20. If I go to the next slide, this is the actual. Yeah, these are the actual zoning boundaries from the GIS map, and it's harder to read on the PDF.
And can you show the slide that shows the property lines? Because it's that weird triangle little lot.
Right here.
That one.
Yeah.
I think the LS5, in my opinion, the LS5 should follow that property line.
Right.
The triangle,
So the LS5
lot.
Right now, it grabs these 2 lots, and this is a commercial property. But if for whatever reason, it's just this rectangular blob that slices the town-owned property, the town garage, in half. You can see it right there, right? Here are the 2 triangle properties. These boundaries seem somewhat arbitrary. I don't quite understand them. I don't know why it's like this. It doesn't make sense. So I think we have an opportunity to make some changes and to do it right. So let me walk you through some of our options. And real quick, I mistakenly referred to these Como properties as town properties. And at our last meeting, I apologize for that. It's a private nonprofit organization. The one in the middle is a town property. That's the one I was thinking of. Regardless, many of these properties are Como, including one that is in the DB5. This vacant property here, this open space is town-owned, and the rest are Como, including this little lot over here. So one option would be just exclude the Como properties. Like, I don't think it's our intention that the Como properties be made available for commercial development. It was really just our intention to better connect these commercial areas, the LS5 and DB5. And I think we could still do that, leave the Como properties alone as they're currently zoned by just grabbing the town-owned property and using that to connect the existing LS5 to the DB5. And then, which brings us to the concern that Alyssa has and the point she brought up, that this really makes no sense that it splits both the Como property and the town-owned property. Best practice in zoning and establishing a zoning district is to follow property lines or the center of a road or the center of a natural feature like a river. Splitting properties is generally not a good practice. So our other option includes amending the existing LS5 as well, just to capture the commercial properties and rezone the balance of these properties to RM20, which most of the properties are RM20. And so we're creating a much smaller contiguous LS5 zone.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I'm indifferent about the Como. It can't be, it's all wet and swamp, and they call it something
Yeah.
like the Como Swamp. So it's never going to get developed more. So I'm sort of indifferent about the Como, but I think it really needs to follow that property line, because once you start drawing zoning lines across properties, then it's like, well, it's 50% is in this zone, and it just
Yeah.
runs into a bunch of issues. So I would do this.
It does. And as a reminder, it wouldn't be us drawing it across properties. That's where the boundaries
I know, that's
currently
what I said,
are.
but
Yeah.
and because it
Yeah.
is, like you said, this random arbitrary
Yeah.
line, like let's stick to the property lines. It makes it clearer. It makes it that lot then is it's just RM20,
Right.
and it's just what it is. And do this.
So this is Lynn. I still want to make sure we're not changing something for the sake of changing something. I'm not sure what the overall benefit is of this. I mean, simplification. I don't know. I don't think we should be moving zoning lines just for the sake of simplification or for the sake of saying we did something. So I just don't think that the rationale for doing this is really there.
I mean, for me, it's like Francisco said, best zoning practice or best practices is to follow a property line, because once you start drawing it through the property, it just opens a can of worms in terms of if they want to do something there. Is it residential? Is it LS5, and is it 50%, and people try to finagle the numbers and do all that. So I think it's just better to clean it up while we're doing this. If nothing else, you could leave it the existing LS5 and keep the same zone, but just clean up that line. I think it makes sense just
Yeah,
to
I
have
mean,
one
that's
zone
what
in
I
that
think.
area.
Yeah. I mean, I'm fine with cleaning up the line. I'm not sure about changing the zones. That's my point.
Lynn, what initiated this recommendation was that the uses and the development pattern in this DB5 here, and this is the only DB5 that exists outside of along the Mystic River, is that it's inconsistent with the purpose of the DB5 zone. And it really, the uses and the development patterns are far better aligned with the LS5. And that's what precipitated this recommendation.
Yeah. Well, again, we've had input from a citizen talking about this, and I think his point is there someone else trying to speak? I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I thought I heard somebody. I think his point was, why mess with something that's not broken? Let's just not make change for change's sake. This definitely, there's a bit of a hodgepodge here in this area, as there is all over Stonington. Best practice, shouldn't really necessarily dictate changing a zone, because it definitely affects property values, etc. So, I just think we really need to think about that and whether the justification is there.
I think
And I don't know if that person is online or not, but
yeah, that was Bill Sternberg, I think. And I
Yeah.
think that what we're proposing here protects him better than leaving it the way it is, because it really clears up that he's concerned about the town hall property, which is the highway garage, going non-residential.
commercial. Yeah,
Right,
yeah,
commercial. And
exactly.
This protects him in my mind, because it gives more it defines that boundary clearer, that lot is 100% residential, as opposed to right now it's split, which I think is ambiguous.
Yeah.
And I that's what that's my understanding, that I think it makes it clearer and strengthens his position.
Okay.
Is that true, Francisco, or am I
Yeah, I
wrong?
think I'm not familiar with his position, but I think your understanding of it is consistent with my perspective, that if there's a concern about development of town property, that property being entirely in the residential zone, the RM20, would help ameliorate that concern.
Okay. I mean, if that's how people feel, I just,
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we've addressed it and we've got it down, that
Yeah.
we've heard
Okay.
this and we're okay with this path forward.
All right, and we just need to agree to move this on to the next step, which
Yeah.
is we document exactly what the recommended amendment is, and we table it for the course of our work, and then at a later date, you decide whether or not you want to put it on an agenda to consider for adoption.
Okay,
Okay.
that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, very good. So do I understand option 2 is the preferred option, this option that we're looking at right here?
Yes.
Yes, that is what I heard.
Yeah, I think it makes the most sense. Okay, very good. Let's move on. And so I will amend the memorandum that we distributed to reflect the second option, and we will redistribute that.
Thank you.
Okay, revisiting our discussion about expanding the range of permitted uses, and this brings us back to the concern that Lynn had earlier about microbreweries. We agreed to expand the range of uses across essentially almost all of your districts for specific uses, including boat part sales, community center, conference center, distillery, indoor boat storage, microbrewery, brew pub, retail restaurant, mixed-use residential, self-storage facility, theater and wellness center. That's documented in the memorandum, and here are the additions. For all those items in red, those uses were not previously permitted in those zones. So, yeah, I'll give you an opportunity to digest that, and I'm happy to answer any questions or take some time to talk about this.
Yeah, I think I was okay with these.
It's fairly conservative when you consider the range of uses that you do allow. we've narrowed it down to, what, about 10 or so that, and very selectively, that we're allowing them in districts.
Yeah, this looks good to me. Flipping back and forth between the map just to get a sense, but
Okay, if there are no concerns about this, if we're all in agreement that this is the recommendation you'd like to make, then we will move forward.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay. Next, and I talked about this a little earlier, is to reduce the permit requirements for 2 uses in the PV5, microbrewery / brew pubs and laundromats. And that, once again, reducing it from a special use permit to a site plan application. Restaurants currently only require a site plan application in the PV5, which is why we had recommended reducing that requirement for brew pubs as well. And laundromats it's really more of a personal service type retail function. So those businesses are only required by site plan application.
So if it was only if the microbrewery is only requiring site plan application, then how would we limit any concerns on odor?
Well, once again, it's not that you're going to be regulating odor, right? That's going to be regulated through by the state. What you could be regulating, and I realize we don't have the standards in place now, is where they are located relative to residential development. And a site plan application comes before you for approval. And as a component of that application, they would need to demonstrate compliance with the standard. So it's something you would still get a chance to review. The difference being is that there's a few less permit requirements and there's no public hearing requirement.
I just think there should be a public hearing requirement for this. Not for laundromat, but for the microbrewery.
Okay. Anyone else have thoughts on that?
I think so too. I think.
Yeah. Okay.
yeah, I'm in agreement with that, with the concern that was raised. I definitely don't think it's necessary for laundromats, but for microbreweries, maybe kind of combining two things to me. The brewery aspect of it is more the actual creation of beer versus the serving, but I think it's.
And I do think we require a special use permit and all other zones were permitted. In fact, if I go back to the previous slide, we'll be able to see that. Yeah, so in all other zones where you permit it, it's currently a special use permit, and what we've recommended, where we are now recommending allow it in GC 60, TC 80, we're also recommending by special use permit.
And that would allow us to have a public hearing as well, correct?
That is correct.
Yes.
So that makes sense.
All right, well, we'll make that change. Next item, we agreed to introduce a regulation on adult-oriented establishments. The definition is right there on the page. We keep the definition pretty simple. There are some definitions I've seen that go into a lot of detail, more than is probably necessary. Once again, as a reminder, the value of this regulation is that it enables you to control where these types of establishments are located in the town. You cannot outright prohibit them. The courts have favored these establishments being located, being not prohibited, I should say, in communities as a means of freedom of speech. So you cannot outright prohibit them, but you can control where they're located, and you can provide standards, provided they are reasonably allowed to exist. So we have prepared recommended zoning amendments and set of regulations for these types of establishments, and it's documented in the memorandum. And here's the meat of it. First of all, requires special use permit. We would limit it to the HI 60. There it is right there, and it's specified in the memorandum. Require the establishments to be located at least 1,000 feet from a daycare, place of worship, public park or playground, or school serving grades 12 or lower. Require at least 200 feet from a residential district, at least 500 feet from another adult-oriented establishment. Prohibit outside display of materials, and some other controls around exactly how those measurements are conducted. Any questions or comments on this?
I think that's fine.
So, can we add a couple things here? So, when we talk about no adult-oriented establishments shall be designed, constructed, and conducted, is there something we can say about language in signage?
That probably sounds like we might get into a little free speech problem.
Yes, unfortunately so. There have been a couple of rulings at Supreme Court over the past decade now that suggest that through zoning authority, zoning ordinances cannot control the content of the sign. Your authority is limited to the construction of the sign, the size of the sign, the placement, location, etc., but not the content. And I realize there are plenty of zoning regulations that still have language related to content and prohibit any obscene, lewd language or anything to that effect. And we could certainly write something to that effect, but it can be challenged in court, most likely successfully challenged in court. So it's really a decision for you to make whether or not you want to reach for something that the courts have established you don't have the authority to regulate.
Well, a couple of things. I always think it's better to, I mean, you put it in there, and if somebody wants to challenge it, we can always back out. But also where the sign is. So, it says from the outside of the building that houses the adult oriented establishments. So, I mean, it could be on the lot someplace. Could we say that it can't be within such and such distance of the street? It can't be, higher than the building, something like that. And my second point is to bullet point C, the 500 feet from another adult-oriented establishment. So where did you come up with the 500 number, Francisco?
Yeah, we worked on one of these regulations a couple of years ago. And so we did a lot of research at that time on taking a look at regulations across the state. And this was kind of the average, the middle of the road as to where these standards fell. And so we feel it's a fairly conservative standard, and we're comfortable as with this standard as a starting point.
Okay, because I think we have a reg that even says for gas stations they can't be closer than a larger amount than 500 feet. So I guess in this instance, I'd like not to take the middle of the road. I'd like to take a more conservative approach, perhaps, on the distance between establishments. And I do think very much that the signage needs to be beefed up as to where it can be located. Since we can't, and I totally understand the freedom of speech, but I think we can certainly beef that up a little bit as to where the sign can be located, and perhaps even the lighting factor, et cetera. Although I don't know if that's possible.
Okay. What we do need to ensure, because we are limiting this to one zone, and that zone is only located in one area of the town, is that we don't specify distances that make it completely infeasible for such a business to be established. Because what the courts have found is that when these distance requirements are excessive, that they found that that's a de facto prohibition, and they have overturned municipalities in those regulations. So we need to be careful that we don't overreach with respect to that.
Yeah. Okay.
I understand. I'm looking at the zoning map now, and I'm looking at that HI 60 zone. It seems like a very long, not very, but a pretty long, narrow strip, but it's certainly long. So, again, I can't judge by the map how long it is, but it's certainly, longer than, for example, the TC 80 zone. So, if you could just take a look at the number. I understand what you're saying. We can't make it ridiculous, but I do think we should take the more conservative approach.
Okay. Well, I can take a closer look at that zone and just do some takeoffs on measurements, some kind of what if scenarios, and see if what we can do with those numbers.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Okay, very good. So we'll revise this recommendation to include some controls on signage and I need to do a little research on that to make sure we don't get in trouble on that. But to the extent feasible, that we provide controls on signage that are above and beyond what is required for other types of signage. And we'll take a look at the distancing requirements as well.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so that concludes the recommended amendments that we agreed upon at our last meeting. And that brings us to the items that we've discussed, but have not had an opportunity to adequately discuss to make decisions on. And so that I've got a few items that are remaining. The first is to consolidate use types for the purpose of simplifying the regulations and maybe being a little more flexible with our uses. So this is the list I had initially populated based upon our discussion last time. We talked a little bit about auto sales and service, and it seemed like you were not interested in treating those as one and the same, and you'd rather keep those separate.
Yes.
Clifton, in the interim, Clifton had gotten back to us, and he had discouraged the grouping of microbreweries, brew pubs, and restaurants all as one use, and so we've struck that. That leaves the balance of these, and so I'd like to go through them one by one, starting with assembly, light manufacturing, and compounding or fabrication. Those are all have their own use terms. They have their own row in the use table. They are all allowed by the same permit type in the same districts. So I wonder if we can just collapse these into light manufacturing.
That makes sense to me.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, I'm okay with that.
Right. So we would just modify the definition of light manufacturing to include assembly, compounding, or fabrication. Okay. Next, we've talked about this quite a bit actually, but I don't think we've arrived at any conclusions. We have bait and tackle sales, boat part sales, and those are both retail functions. They are specifically allowed in certain areas. I wonder if we could just consider those to be included in retail sales so that we're not limiting where boat parts can be sold or bait and tackle can be sold. If we could just allow those to be sold anywhere where retail is allowed. The flip side of this is that in your marine commercial zone, you're very strict about uses in that zone, and there are very specific uses that are permitted. And we talked last time, restaurants are permitted, but you don't want to permit a microbrewery or brew pub. Along the same lines, you could still continue to restrict the types of retail in that zone. So you could say only the following retail uses are allowed in this zone: bait and tackle sales and boat part sales. But as the regulations are organized right now, and as we interpreted them when we did the first phase of updates, these were identified as separate retail uses, and we interpreted that to mean that they are not allowed in other areas where retail is allowed. Did I do an okay job of explaining that? Do you understand what I'm getting at here?
So my comment to
Yeah.
oh, someone else, like my comment to Clifton on this, and I'm not really sure, but from what I remember, on the corner of Palmer Neck and Greenhaven, there's a house that sells bait and tackle. Does anyone know that house? I don't know if it's still there.
I do not.
I don't-
I don't.
What?
I said I do not. I don't.
It was like a little, and I don't know if they did it as a home business or what. So would that not be allowed there? Sometimes bait and tackle sales are tiny little shops that just sell worms, like
Yeah.
for someone driving to because when they're driving to Barn Island, they stop there, I'm sure, and get
Yeah.
bait and tackle. And I don't know if that's still true. I don't know if that store is still there, that little, someone must know what I'm talking about.
But to me, I
No?
think it almost, I mean, bait and tackle sales, it's retail, right? To me,
Yes.
I'm not sure why it was kind of carved out. I'm sure back when it made sense to a degree, but to me, it seems perfectly fits under retail.
But if you say like you can allow retail in these zones, like this little house that has bait and tackle as an accessory use or whatever it is at that,
Mhm.
I'm just thinking about this one particular thing and how that might affect everything else. Would it not be allowed someplace else if they just want to put a bait and tackle because it's not allowed as retail?
Mhm.
You see what I'm saying? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that's exactly what I wanted to draw
Oh wait,
attention
someone
to.
just did. Rick, someone just commented that the building is still there, and someone knows what I'm talking about.
Okay. All
The
right.
building is still
And
there, but hasn't been a bait shop for years. But
all right.
that was just
Yeah.
my thought about in general.
Yeah.
You could have someone who just wants to sell bait and tackle.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's one in
So,
Westerly. There's a bait and tackle
yeah,
store on
sure.
the
It's like
river.
night crawlers, right? They say
Yeah.
Yeah,
selling night
exactly. So
crawlers.
it's
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you don't want that building to
yeah,
be selling be a
yeah,
store. They're
yeah.
just selling.
Night crawlers.
So I don't know if it's that
So,
big a deal because it probably wouldn't come up that much. But it was
Yeah.
just a
Yeah.
comment I had. It was just a comment I had for Clifton.
but here's my thing. I think the way Francisco has
Mhm.
explained this, and this is where the follow up and dotting the I's and crossing the T's is very important, is that we're allowing bait and tackle and boat parts sales anywhere you can have retail, but you are only allowing bait and tackle and boat parts sales in the marine district.
Correct. Yes.
So we
Okay.
have to make sure that we have, again, make sure that that language is in the definition for that zone. And
Yeah.
every time a permit comes up talking about it, it's brought forward to the commission that this is the only, and we don't have to justify that we're not allowing a dress shop. Okay?
Mhm, mhm.
So, I think what's happening more and more is that these definitions of the zones, we don't know all the ins and outs of every definition and everything that's allowed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, the commission kind of says, okay, yeah, without having the full definition, and then we're told, well, why do we have to justify not allowing it? So it
Mhm.
has to be very explicit.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah, and I do think we can accomplish that. And it's really pretty simple, right? We just provide a caveat attached to the marine commercial zone that says within the marine commercial zone, only the following types of retail are permitted.
That makes
And
sense.
that's that. That way we're not prohibiting some of these nuanced uses from other zones where,
Yeah, all right.
maybe they're appropriate. That are,
Yeah, and I think this bait
yeah,
shop that I'm thinking of was probably permitted as a home business
yeah,
because it
Probably.
was tiny.
right,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. We just don't want it to fall through the cracks. That's what I'm saying.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
One
Okay.
one of the challenges in interpreting regulations, particularly as amendments are made over decades, is that very specific carve-outs are created for essentially one development application, for one
Right.
property, for one use. And that carve-out is created specifically to address that property. And then you have something incredibly nuanced that's introduced into the regulations. And once you do that, you specifically permit that very nuanced use in that zone. But then you introduce uncertainty as to whether or not that use would be permitted, is permitted or prohibited in other zones as
Yeah.
part of a broader use group. And to the greatest extent possible, we want to make sure we're not precluding something that should otherwise be permitted as a matter of course. And it's
Yeah.
our
No, okay.
interpretation that retail means any type of retail sales, and that should be allowed everywhere. Even though when we initially did our work, our research, we found that there was only one zone where bait and tackle sales and boat part sales were specifically permitted, right?
Right. Yeah. Okay. I'm okay.
All right. The next item, let's hold on to that because I have a slide that will support our discussion on that. Let's move on to community center and municipal facility. Can we treat these all the same and just call them civic uses? They're allowed in all the same places. I think,
Yeah, that makes sense.
Como is a community center. It's not municipal because it's not town, but it's a civic use, as is a municipal facility. So we would just want to collapse these things that we treat exactly the same. We allow in the same places, we require the same type of permit, we have the same standards. We should just treat it all as one and the same.
Yeah, I'm okay.
So is the Grange considered a civic use?
I'm not familiar with the Grange. What's the Grange?
On Pequot Trail?
Yeah.
It's like an Elks kind of place, right?
No, that would be a
Is that what is the Grange exactly? I might be speaking out of turn.
I think it is kind of like, I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think it is kind of like an Elks.
Yeah, I think we have that defined under
That's
membership
kind of my general
organization.
understanding of what a Grange would be. Yeah. that's kind of my general understanding of what it would be. I don't know specifically.
Yeah.
But a voting hall, like the voting hall in Mystic, on I guess is it School Street? Is that
That
a
one, yeah.
civic use?
Sure.
Yeah, that would be
Okay.
a civic
That
use.
little building? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the fifth district or whatever, that cute little voting hall. I always
Yeah,
wanted to
yeah.
vote there.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I just want, civic use is it's kind of I understand your concept, Francisco, and I agree with it. I just think the word civic use, that title
Too broad?
is ambiguous to me. Yes. Yes. To
Okay.
be honest with you, it's ambiguous. Same
Yeah.
as indoor entertainment facility is very ambiguous to
Well,
me.
we do have a definition that provides detail as to exactly what
Okay.
that means.
Okay.
So I think we could probably do the same for civic use, and so we'd have a definition that would capture that, and we would say, for example, a community center, a town offices, town facility, et cetera.
Voting facility.
Right, correct.
Okay. Great. Thank you.
Right. Okay. Next item, indoor boat storage. And this, I think this follows the same logic as our discussion about bait and tackle sales and boat part sales. So indoor boat storage was identified as a permitted use in the HM. However, the question then is, well, is it not allowed anywhere else? And we talked about this a little last time, so I think we're on the same page. But it would make sense wherever you allow bulk storage to allow, which is indoor storage of large items, to allow boat storage. And, there'd be some obvious controls around that, the size of the boat, the size of the facility, the location of the facility. But we could just treat indoor boat storage as bulk storage. And once again, in the marine commercial, where it's really not our intention to allow, storage facilities for commodities and goods to be kept that aren't marine related, we could put restrictions on that.
I think that makes sense.
And Francisco, just to be sure, this would not be considered self-storage.
No.
To put in a self-storage.
Yeah, we have self-storage.
That's very clear. Okay.
Yeah, we have self-storage as a separate use.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Next, medical clinic and wellness center. Clifton encouraged us collapsing this into one category. I think there's also a recent amendment to this effect, expanding the definition of medical clinic. And they're allowed in the same places by the same permit type. So just call it medical clinic or health center.
Real quick, Francisco, I see Fred Dykeman had his hand raised. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to indoor boat storage for a minute.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
and
please.
Suggest that perhaps that's treated separately because boat storage generally gets pretty hazardous. And all you got to do is look at some of the boat fires that we see up and down the coast. And I wonder if calling it bulk storage doesn't relax some of the rules about that kind of equipment. Just a thought.
Yeah. Thank you, Fred. Anyone have concerns about boats being stored anywhere?
It's a very good point, Fred, because, look at the fire.
Yeah.
Well,
all the boats that were stored in the fire downtown.
Yeah, I guess my question would be, and I understand his concern, is indoor boat storage, bulk storage, does that allow bulk chemical storage? You could also have flammable materials involved, right? Kind of how I'm thinking.
Yep.
So,
Well, I don't have an answer, but worth looking into, I think.
no, agreed. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking.
Okay. I can
Yeah,
discuss with Clifton. And we may arrive at the conclusion that we want to check with the fire marshal to see what the fire marshal thinks of this.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay, I'll make that note. I'll follow up with Clifton to that effect.
So,
Okay, medical clinic wellness center. Yep.
So I just, again, it all has to do with the definitions. So medical clinic health center, would this be considered a rehab center?
No, those are those are excluded
separate
from our definition of either.
Okay.
Yeah. So this isn't expanding anything that isn't currently allowed. It's really just collapsing two different use definitions into one.
Okay, great. Thank you.
To treat them interchangeably.
Okay.
Right. And then the last item is we allow theaters, billiard parlors, which the last two here, billiard parlors and bowling alleys. I don't know how many applications you're going to see for a new billiard parlor or bowling alley. Which is another reason why we might just consider collapsing some of these terms that are now becoming antiquated into a broader description, such as indoor entertainment facility. You know, as it is, some theaters, and I don't know how long this business model is going to last, but some theaters are being converted into laser tag type experiential places to remain viable. Movie theaters, that is. So if we have a broader use category, provide a little more flexibility in what actually happens within that space.
But it would not be considered something like, I don't know, pickleball courts?
No, that's recreation. That's
okay,
recreation.
That's recreation.
Yeah,
okay.
And we that falls under, we have a category for both indoor and outdoor recreation.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Okay. Okay.
It
Yeah.
makes
Okay.
sense to me to collapse it.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. So thank you for that, for working through it. I've got some direction, so we'll run with that. Okay. Going back to brewery, distillery, and winery, Clifton asked us to do just a little more homework on this to see what the implications would be of treating these as all one and the same. And so it becomes clear that brewery and distillery have some similarities, not treated exactly the same in the regs. Wineries treated very differently. Wineries are allowed in more districts. Brewery and distillery, brewery in only 3 M1 HF, AHD. And once again, we're not talking about a brew pub or a microbrewery. We're talking about a large, manufacturing type operation.
Mm.
And the same with distillery. We're not talking about a craft distillery. We're talking about a large manufacturing operation. Distilleries are only allowed in the HM right now and the AHD. I'm not quite sure why they're not allowed in the M1. It's a manufacturing process. So I think if we were to go anywhere with this, we might consider treating breweries and distilleries the same. Or at the very least, just allowing distilleries in the M1, even if we keep those as separate uses. But I think it becomes clear that wineries we should continue to treat separately.
Yeah, they should be different.
Yeah.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah.
to put a lot of them in it is they are manufacturing, so
Yes. And it's likely that someone could successfully argue that their distillery as a manufacturing operation should be allowed as a manufacturing use in the M1.
yeah.
All right. Makes sense to me.
All right. In the AHD, the restrictions are around only small scale operations, microbrewery and craft distillery. All right.
Mhm.
Okay. Village district. We've talked about this a little before. The creation of a village district and the creation of village district design guidelines are outside the scope of what we are doing with our zoning update. However, it's not beyond us to make a recommendation to this effect. And the broad overview here is that village districts, much like a local historic district, give the town authority that extends beyond your zoning authority, and it allows you to regulate the architecture and other aspects of building construction, site design that are visible from the public realm, much like a local historic district. Unlike a local historic district, it does not require property owners to, in majority, vote to adopt such district. It can be done by action of the legislative authority. So your board of selectmen can decide, essentially, we want to create a village district in this area, and they adopt a district. And then you need to develop design guidelines for the district. And then finally appoint a board or entity to be the board or entity responsible for reviewing applications for consistency with those design guidelines. Presumably that would be your architecture review board. So this is a very powerful instrument. One of the reasons we brought it forward as an idea is because at our workshop for commercial industrial zones that we conducted back in, I think it was September now, there was a lot of interest in doing a better job of regulating the look and feel and character of development that extends well beyond what can be controlled through zoning. And so that's where that idea got started. If you were to create a zoning, or excuse me, a village district, and here's an example of guidelines we developed for the town of Glastonbury. So as you see, it's very different from a set of zoning regulations. It's very concerns itself very much with architecture and aesthetics. They're very visual. The guidelines themselves tend to be very visual in their nature. The two areas that we think would be the best candidates for a village district would be the DB5 and LS5 zones in Mystic, and on the other side of town, the PV5 and the HM in Pawcatuck. I don't recommend expanding any village district or creating a village district that overlays a residential neighborhood, because unlike a local historic district that really concerns itself with historic structures, village district zoning is really intended to address commercial development, mixed use development, and public realm. And it's really not an effective instrument for regulating the development of single family homes or residential streets. It's most effective when applied to older commercial districts like these. So if we were to make a recommendation to this effect, these are the areas that I would consider. We were asked about the M1 zone down here along the rail corridor to include that because it's contiguous with the LS5, in which case you could potentially bring that in. Now, if this is something we wanted to advance as an idea, what we would do is we would write up a recommendation similar to the memorandums, our recommended amendments that we've produced. And that recommendation would describe the purpose for the creation, the benefit that it provides. We'd provide the mapping to show the recommended limits of such district. We could describe the process by which it would be adopted and administered. And that's the extent of it. Outside of that, that's something that would go to your board of selectmen for them to consider. And it would also require the development of design guidelines to accompany adoption. And it doesn't have to be completed before adoption, but it would have to accompany adoption. And that would require either a separate process conducted by volunteers, by ASDRC, or by a hired consultant to develop those. So we would not develop the design guidelines as part of this process. We would not, you as a commission would not be the authority that adopts such districts, but you could endorse the recommendation and pass that on to the Board of Selectmen. So with that being said, I'm receptive to any comments or questions you have about this.
My comment is I don't think we're ready for it yet. You know, since we don't have any idea of the amount of work to develop the regulations, I think it's a great idea down the line, and it's something to talk about. I don't know, once we get through this, but you know, until I don't think so, not right now.
This is
I
Ryan.
understand everything you're saying, but I don't think,
Mm-hmm.
you know, we have the resources, the time, the funding to do it right now.
Yeah, this is Ryan. I would agree with that. I think maybe something that would be good. I mean, my first question is, okay, well, what's the benefit of doing it? I think if we were going to even consider it, we'd have to have a pretty clear idea of what the actual benefits are to people, us to go, you know, pass up for people and even probably to the town as a whole, right? Okay, what's this going to gain us? To Alyssa's point, there'd be a lot of work to do it. So I don't think it's something we necessarily want to pursue at this time. But I don't think it would be a bad idea maybe to say, you know, pros and cons. If there's a high level pros and cons that you guys could come up with, it might be something that we could kind of keep in our back pocket to consider further down the road.
So since we're also just launching into our POCD, that could be something that they would look at as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. This could end up being a recommendation of the POCD that's explored through that process. Very much so.
Yeah. So maybe I think that's where we'd look at it. And since we're about to launch onto that project, that would be a better place, I think, for this conversation at this time.
In fact,
So this is Lynn.
Yeah, Lynn, go ahead. Yep.
So I have to say that I'm highly in favor of this. And I think what has been explained by Francesco is that we would, as a committee for this, for the rewrite, we wouldn't do anything further than saying we recommend that somebody takes future action on this. And I think that the sooner we recommend that, the better off we're going to be. And, you know, I mean, how long are we going to wait? The benefit to the town is to preserve the character of the town that is quickly being eroded away by, you know, 40-foot buildings, by, you know, pretty soon you're going to look at these districts, and if you look at the definition that was proposed, it says, in keeping with the architecture of the surrounding buildings. Well, all the surrounding buildings are being renovated now. Look at Cottrell Street. Look at what's happened on that whole intersection of the flagpole. You know, I really feel like it's not a big ask to say to this committee, you know, we want to bring this forward to the selectmen to say, you need to create something based on feedback that we have gotten from the community, and you need to look at this and take action on it now. It doesn't mean We have to do that. We're bringing it forward. And what better time than to bring it forward at the same time as the rewrite of the POCD? So I mean, I just think all we're giving it is a nod, kind of a kick in the pants. Very little effort, very little time, but a big impact as to saying the selectman then says, hey, listen, this came up on the zoning rewrite. It's coming up with the rewrite of the POCD. It's come up in town meetings that we've had where we've tried to get feedback on what's going on in the town. And so we need to take action on it. So I think we should definitely move forward with this.
Disagree. I don't like the idea. I mean, I need a lot more information on it, and I'm not ready to move forward on this right now.
But all we're moving forward on is saying we think you need to look at creating a district. That's all we're not defining the district. We're not saying where the district should be, definitely. We're just saying here's some ideas, but we've gotten feedback, and this is what needs to be looked at. That's all we're doing.
But I think we can do that as part of the POCD. I think it's premature right now. That's all I'm saying.
But as part of the POCD, we've already got that contract. This isn't part of the POCD. This wasn't part of the rewrite of the POCD.
Sure it is. Sure it is. Why wouldn't it be?
Well, I think that can probably be certainly factored into the POCD, I would think, to a degree. I don't, and Francisco, I'll kind of defer a little bit here.
Yeah.
I don't think there's an issue. I don't have an issue with making a general suggestion saying, hey, look into a village district. But I think we need, whatever that would be definitions and pros and cons to me to be able to present, effectively to the first select people and then let it go from there.
I mean, if you want the recommendation to just be look into it, which is kind of vague and nothing, fine. But I don't want to make any kind of, we think this is a good idea. I'm not ready to say that we think this is a good idea and we support this.
Yeah,
that's where I'm not ready.
Agree.
That's where I'm not ready to say.
I think, yeah.
So I do think it is well within the scope of the POCD update to explore this idea. And while the POCD update, you're not going to develop the regulations, and you would within that update and that process have conversations internally and with the community through your community engagement efforts about this idea. See what the community thinks, perhaps gather some support for it. And then you would make this recommendation, what I'm suggesting we could make here. You would make that recommendation within the plan of conservation and development to establish village districts in these areas or other areas wherever it is decided. And then it would be incumbent upon Board of Selectmen to take action on that.
And I think, just jump in, Francisco, I think Salvatore, see his hand raised.
Yes, Sal's been patiently waiting. Sal, go ahead.
So we had significant discussion about the HM zone and PV5 within EDC, circling back to the look back period. And I just like to, point out the fact that, there's a significant amount of residential in that area along Mechanic Street. And there's already a huge obstacle for them to do any work on these properties to fix them up because of the look back period issues that they have with trying to come into conformity. Yeah. So, to put any other hurdles on top of that, I think would cause these residences not to have any upgrades or modifications or basic maintenance, which a lot of them need. I think that, keep this look, that we're talking about, if you look back to the Pawtucket Village District, and you look at some of the historical homes, they actually do go, to 40 feet and sometimes above. And a lot of these places are also on Route 1 and Route 2. So, there would need to be some significant work at looking at, what were some of the historic places there, and then figuring out, where exactly this zone should be.
Mhm.
And how it would help the town,
Yep.
based on, some blight and other issues, with regard to the look back period and some of the places that are located within that PV5 and HM zone.
Okay, thank you, Sal. What you can do and what is common within village district regulations is you can exempt single-family homes and two-family homes from being subject to those regulations, even if they're located within the district.
Yeah. Francesca, let me ask you this. Of the more historic towns on the coast of Connecticut, how many of them have village districts?
Yeah, I don't have an answer for you, Lynn. I would have to look into that. It is not an uncommon tool, but
Right.
not every town has one.
Yeah.
And the
I'm
towns
just
that do
trying,
have one, they often only have one.
right. Only one village district. I'm just, listen, we've got, the hotel that's being the small boutique hotel next to the fire station, and every other meeting we hear how terrible that building is, et cetera, et cetera. There's nothing preventing all of downtown Mystic from becoming that type of architecture. Absolutely nothing. That went through the Architectural Review Board. They approved it. And at that time, we talked about historic district, et cetera, and they said, well, we don't have one, right? A village district, I understand, is not a historic district, but it's along the same vein. This is what we're trying to prevent from happening with having a district like this. How we define that, sure, that's going to take some work, but the ball has to get started, and we just keep on kicking it off to the next committee, or after we get this bolus of work done, then we'll address it. And I just think, pretty soon there's going to be nothing to address. Absolutely nothing to address. You're not going to be able to get it back. So
Okay.
those are my
Thank
2
you,
cents.
Lynn.
I understand what
see
you're
we-
saying, Lynn, but
I
I'm just
see we
not
have
ready.
another hand raised. Sorry, Alyssa.
ahead.
Maggie, did you want to contribute?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the state lists among the towns who have village districts, Brooklyn, Madison, and Middletown, which gives you examples of 3 different types of towns, including one that's coastal. So I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Maggie. I appreciate that. And the complete list is far more comprehensive. The state doesn't do a great job at inventorying those. But Madison is a great example. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to table this recommendation. Is that the consensus?
I would agree with that for now. Yeah.
And that's my, and I just want to say, I don't think we are pushing it down the road a little bit, but the plan of conservation and development is starting, next month. So it's not like, oh, let's put it down, and forget about it. And it's going to be someone else's problem. It's going to be someone else's problem, next week. So
Okay.
I think the solution to this is going to happen fairly quickly. Maybe not next week, you know what I'm saying, though. It's not an indefinite push down the road. It's not like we're doing the POCD in another 8 years. We're doing it, relatively quickly.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for talking that through. Let's continue. We have a couple more items. The next item is floating zones. The town has several floating zones. just as a refresher. Floating zones are a zone for which they exist on paper until someone applies to rezone an area to that zone standards. And then you as a commission in your legislative capacity can decide to rezone the area in accordance with those zone standards. Hence the term floating. You have 5 different types of floating zones: the Industrial Heritage Reuse District, Maritime Heritage, Neighborhood Development District, Greenway Development District, and AHD, Agricultural Heritage District. Of each zone, there are very few that have actually been located. So the IHRD has been located in 3 different areas. That means that zone change has been approved 3 different times for 3 different areas. MHD is only in 1, NDD in 2 areas, GDD only in 1 area. It's only been landed in 1 spot, and AHD in 3 different areas. So I want to talk this evening about the MHD, the Maritime Heritage District, and the NDD. And the MHD was created, it was essentially custom made for the Mystic Seaport Museum. And the NDD, which is, as I understand it, and we'll talk about this some more, but Clifton has informed me there are a couple of applications that are likely to come forward this year for the creation of additional NDD zones. So let me start with the NDD. So the regulations currently limit the district to a maximum of 5 areas where it can be established. So a maximum of 5. And there are 2 established districts, and there are 3 or 4 applications likely to come forward this year. So the question is, do we want to remove this upper limit or potentially increase it, the upper limit of 5, either remove that or increase it to, I don't know, 10? Is that something that you'd be interested in considering?
No,
No.
I don't like floating zones in general, so I'm going to say no to anything involving them except taking them out.
And the purpose of the NDD is to allow for the development, allow residential development on commercial properties, commercial and industrial properties, creation of a small residential zone in areas that are undeveloped.
I know what the purpose is, I just don't like them.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure everyone here does know the purpose of it, so I think it's important.
I thought I was being rebuked. I took that as a
That
rebuke,
was
I'm sorry.
helpful. That was helpful, Francisco, to explain that. You know, I guess I can understand maybe at a very high level people's resistance to floating zones, but I'm just trying to figure out, okay, well, if we say maximum 5, I mean, I would either be in favor of get rid of floating zones altogether, or I don't know what the restriction would be on a floating zone. Why would be 5 versus 6 versus 10?
So at this
This
point,
is Lynn. I think
yeah,
the
Lynn, go
reason,
ahead.
when we developed the neighborhood development district and we restricted the number, it was really because there's a place for it within Stonington, but not all over Stonington, right? And we don't want our zoning to be stepped by these floating zones. We do want to restrict the number. Otherwise, what's the sense of having zoning at all? So I'm not in favor of changing the number from 5 in the neighborhood development district. And if we get to 5, then maybe then there's a reason to discuss it, but certainly not now.
Okay. I can understand your point on that, Lynn. I guess my way of thinking of it is, okay, I would just rather do away with the floating zone altogether. I mean, I don't see in my mind the logic of saying, okay, we're going to 5. To me, that's an arbitrary number. Why do we decide 5 versus 3 versus 1 versus 2? But I'm fine with leaving it as it is. We don't need to increase it or decrease it. Okay. But if this comes up again, I would say I'd rather just do away with the floating zone. It removes the confusion and sort of the impression that it's arbitrary.
Right. I do think that talking about the marine, that the, what do you call it? The seaport is a different discussion.
Yeah.
Maritime, like just rezone
Correct.
that into, make a zone that's only the seaport.
Yeah.
And that makes sense.
Okay.
That seems to make sense, because that is just kind of silly. It is tailor-made for that district. So why,
Right.
I would be okay with doing that.
Okay. So the adoption of a floating zone, the approval, you have the ultimate authority to approve or to deny, and you can deny on any basis because this is redistricting, and the redistricting is done in your legislative capacity, not in your administrative capacity. So unlike a special use permit application or a site plan application, where if the applicant meets all of the criteria, you essentially have to approve it. I mean, you can deny it, but if ZBA will overturn you or the courts will. You have the authority to deny any and all requests for a zone change to land a floating zone in your legislative capacity for any reason whatsoever. All right, so you do have a high measure of control. So I don't think there's a concern about the town being overrun by too many districts. That being said, it does put you in the position that you have to deny and explain your rationale. And, you have these items on your agenda, and maybe you have someone that's upset that they were denied. And I realize that's a challenge as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think what I'm hearing is not to make any changes to this at this point.
Okay. All right, to the NDD. Well, let's go, and Alyssa just mentioned this. Let's talk about the Maritime Heritage District. So there are at least a couple of pages of regulatory content in the zoning regulations right now that describe exactly how to go about creating one of these districts, what the requirements are for establishing the district, how the commission is to decide upon adopting a district. And all of that is unnecessary language because this district was created for one location in the town. I don't think it was ever the intention that another maritime heritage district would be created on the east side of town or anywhere else in town for that matter. So all of that regulatory content is really dead weight in the zoning regulations. Mm-hmm. And it invites someone to try to propose a maritime heritage district somewhere else in town where I don't believe that was ever the intention. So it's our recommendation to essentially just convert this to a base zoning district by removing all the regulatory content that talks about how a district is adopted and created, and instead retaining the content regarding permitted uses in the district and all the standards for the district itself. In which case, we would move this section of the regulations out of the floating zone section and into the commercial and industrial zone section. And we would also add a column to the use table for the MHD, identifying as permitted uses all the uses that were permitted as part of the initial application and site plan, part of the master plan for the district. Does that sound like a reasonable approach?
Yes.
Yeah, I think it does.
The easy thing to do is just not to touch this. Yeah, the easy thing to do is just to leave it alone and go about business. However, we have an opportunity here, right, to continue our work in cleaning up the regulations and removing content that we don't intend to use and is not intended for use in the future. And that's what this would accomplish. Lynn, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So it wouldn't do anything to the current Maritime Heritage District, though they would still have to come back every single time there's an issue of changing something, and we'd have to go through the process, correct?
Correct.
Okay. All right.
Correct.
Thank you.
It would only remove the enabling content that enables this district to be created somewhere else in town.
Yeah.
Right.
I
And
agree.
which actually spans 5 different sections. I have them listed there.
I think it makes sense.
Yeah. I'm good with that too.
Okay. All right. So we'll move forward with and write a memorandum that describes exactly what changes would need to be made for action to be taken on this.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. The last item, this is something Clifton brought to my attention. There is currently no use or use group that allows for landscapers or contractors, site contractors that have outdoor equipment or outdoor storage of materials to be located anywhere in town. And as I understand, the planning and zoning has had a kind of a workaround for this solution, and they would like to just fix this and specifically allow for these types of uses. So what we recommend is developing a use group called Contractor Yard, and it essentially describes a construction or landscaping contractor that is allowed to store outdoor equipment and outdoor materials and supplies. And we would allow that by special use permit in the M1 zone.
Just in that one zone, no other zone.
I'm receptive to ideas about other zones where you
I just
feel.
wanted to make sure I understood. So it's just the one zone.
Right. Right. Currently, our recommendation is just to limit it to the M1, but we're certainly receptive to ideas about other zones in town where you feel this type of use is appropriate.
So, I think we have to be careful of anything that's near the water with this, just because of the nature of some of the things that would be stored. So do we have, I'm just looking at our map.
I'm looking at it. I don't see anything right on the water.
Yeah, there is. It's right on, it's right on Route 1. It's where the old Hubble, it's where Zachary's is. It's right on the cove.
Oh.
I mean, it's right on the cove.
We can also require that any such contractor yard be a specific distance from a water body, whether from the shore or from inland wetland, whatever it may be.
Yeah, I like that. That makes sense to add that.
Yeah, just because of some of the things that could be stored. Although I've got to ask you, like Fleming's on Route 1, they store all sorts of things. They're maybe not large equipment, but they certainly store, dirt and gravel and everything else.
But there's store. So this is allowing just a lot. This is allowing it as a principal use with no store. And that's what I always says, I'm not loving that part. Like as and that would be like outdoor storage, like as an accessory use. But again, in the manufacturing zone, the M1 zone is a zone made for manufacturing. And now we're going to allow someone to take an M1 lot and just store stuff there. And is that what we want? And I know no one's going to come in with manufacturing. And we talked a lot about changing what's allowed in manufacturing zone, but having a lot that has no taxable building on it and using it for just storage. I understand what you're saying and that we need something like that, but I don't know.
Well, so to your point, could you put it in the HI zone, the HI 60 zone?
Is that
No,
what you want for the HI 60? I
no,
think
that's
you're
not what we want
aspiring
in
to
the
something.
HI zone
Yeah.
either.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Okay.
So
I just think you got to be able to have it. I mean, we it's kind of funny that there's more landscapers in the town of Stonington than I think anywhere in the state, and they've got no place to put their equipment. I mean, it seems like that's strange to me.
What are they doing with it now?
I think it would be good to have. I think it would be good to add that language about distance from a body of water. I think that's a valid one.
Mhm.
But
So-
what about the tax situation? Alyssa brings up a really good point. How does that affect, our grand list? It is something to think about. So maybe M1 is not the appropriate zone. Let me just see where.
Would you rather only see this type of use permitted as an accessory use, meaning, there has to be a structure there and maybe it is
An
kind of an
office
industrial
or
structure that's got
Yeah.
a garage and an office. And then if you have the structure, then you could park equipment and store materials, but only as an accessory use to a principal structure or principal use.
Yeah, but you know what? I don't think that's not how that business works. That's not how landscaping business works.
But not all. Yeah.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just that seems like a huge burden to put on 90% of the landscaping businesses in this area. It's just not how they work.
No, that's just my concern. I'm just the same, same as I had the concern with outdoor vending. To me, it's almost the same thing that I'm not saying there's not a need for it, but
Well,
maybe we need to change the tax, how we tax the land. Maybe that's maybe that's something to think about.
Then that might be a little outside our scope.
I know, exactly.
Yeah, I think.
Well, there's definitely a need for it, and I actually, I think I brought this up actually to Clifton a while ago, that there's no place in town that this type of thing can happen, and that seems ridiculous based on the industry and the use of that industry within this town. That people are having to go to North Stonington, etc., in order to, store their equipment or whatever other things. That's ridiculous. So
no, I understand the need for it. I need to, I don't know. I understand the need for it, but to me, it's the same as like having parking. Then why wouldn't we allow parking as a principal use? It's the same thing.
Well, I think the real concern about parking as a principal use is allowing it in your commercial districts and having properties overtaken by parking for tourist purposes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think it's a much different potential impact.
I would think, Francisco, maybe if you could add some language about the distance from the body of water, add that, and then we can look at that and see if we kind of thought about it more. But I think it makes sense.
But can I just ask, why wouldn't you suggest light industrial? Why it's not manufacturing. Why wouldn't you suggest light industrial for that, which is
that would be a better zone. Exactly. I like that idea.
In the LI 130 zone?
Yeah, because that would be a perfect thing for It's not hazardous. You have that big,
Okay.
huge zone by the highway.
Yeah, yeah, okay. Yeah, so
And
not the
it is more
M1,
industrial.
but the LI.
Yes. I like that idea.
It
Thanks,
seems
Lana.
like
That was
it
great.
fits better there because it's not
Okay.
manufacturing, but yeah.
It does.
Okay.
Exactly. If it's, I would be totally fine with it there.
Okay. Well, let's do that. And let's do that. And I think that addresses our concern about proximity to the shore as well.
Yes, that makes me much happier.
Okay, very good. We'll prepare a recommendation to that effect. All right, so our next steps. So I need to take all this feedback I received this evening and take these ideas and put them in the form of recommended amendments, similar to the few that were distributed to you a couple weeks ago. We need to schedule and conduct a virtual public presentation of our recommended commercial and industrial zone amendments. And we're not quite there yet, but it's on our radar. And I of course need to coordinate with Clifton on that, make sure we have a date that works for all of you. The purpose of these meetings, we've conducted 3 of them to date. The purpose of these meetings is to present to the public in a public forum the purpose of our work, the recommendations that we are advancing, and answer any questions that the public might have on those. Those meetings are recorded, and the recording's made available. Just as this meeting is made available, this recording will be made available. And then we will be moving on to our next realm of work, which includes site design, buffer requirements, parking, and signage. So between now and our next meeting in a couple weeks, we're going to review the regulations. I'll coordinate with Clifton and start to identify potential needs in these areas, and we'll have our first discussion about that at our next meeting. So our next meeting we'll use to review the recommendations that came out of this meeting, make sure we're all in agreement on what was decided, and then we will introduce this next segment of work. And our next regular meeting on our regular meeting schedule, that being the 4th Wednesday of the month, is January 26th or 22nd at 6 p.m.
It's going to be right after our 21st meeting, which I have a sense is going to be a long one.
If you prefer to push it to the 29th, I'm happy to do that. That our regular meeting schedule had been the 4th Wednesday of the month. Of course, the month starting on Wednesday, it puts it a little earlier in the month than it would normally occur. So
I'm not going to lie, I prefer it on the 29th, just because we do have the regular meeting, the P&Z meeting on the 21st. We have a lot of items on the agenda. I prefer it there, but I'll defer to others.
I'd prefer it on the 22nd. I'm out of town on the 29th.
And I'm now remembering the 29th is my daughter's birthday. So
you're just now remembering?
I made the mistake of scheduling a meeting on my wife's birthday this past year.
Whoa.
And fortunately,
I'm still here to talk about it.
Yeah, fortunately, the meeting only lasted an hour, and we had family over, and no one noticed that I disappeared for an hour. But so I don't want to do that to my daughter. So I'm willing to stick with the 22nd, or if we need to do another night of the week, I'm happy to do that as well.
No, let's stick with the 22nd then. No.
I won't be available the 22nd.
Okay, and if we need to do the 23rd, I don't have anything on the 23rd. I can do that as well.
I could do the 23rd. I don't know if others can.
I'd have to check my other calendar.
I
I
can
can
do
do
the
the
23rd.
23rd.
At least give us a day between the two.
Yeah.
A little rest in between.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me follow up with Clifton on the 23rd, just to make sure we're not going to run in conflict with some other important town meeting that night. It doesn't sound like that would be impactful to the rest of you, but let me run it by him, and we will follow up with the invite as to which date we will hold the meeting on.
Great, thanks.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Sounds
All
good.
right, thank you
Perfect.
everyone for a very productive meeting. I appreciate it. I think the 6 o'clock start is very helpful just to our energy levels and our ability to push later if we need to. So thanks for being willing to meet a little earlier.
Sure.
Sounds good. Thanks,
Okay.
everybody.
Good night,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Have a nice evening.
Bye.
Bye.
Francisco, while people are leaving, I just wanted
Yes.
to draw your attention to the chat because you were talking. So, and I didn't
Oh,
want
I
to.
missed it. Did you put something in there?
I didn't want to slow down the meeting, but I just
Yep.
randomly, in answer to the question, are there coastal towns that have village
Yeah.
districts? I just randomly looked up 5, and
Oh, you did?
I looked up Guilford, Old Saybrook, Essex, Westport, and Greenwich because I
Okay.
figured they have historic areas like we do, that are also commercial areas.
Yes,
And every single one I looked up has one.
they
And Old
do.
Saybrook
Okay.
has 3 and Greenwich has 2.
Old
Um,
Saybrook has 3. Wow.
Old Saybrook has 3, yeah.
All right. So Guilford,
So
Old Saybrook, did you say Westport?
Essex, yes, Westport, Essex,
Yeah.
and Greenwich.
Essex, Greenwich.
And I think Greenwich has 2.
Right. Okay.
They have
Well,
one in Old Greenwich, and then I think they also have one in
yeah.
Greenwich proper.
All right. Well, thanks, Maggie, for that homework. I appreciate it. And I'm sorry, when I'm in presentation mode, I can't see the chat, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah, I get it. Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
That's why I
yeah,
just
it
wanted
like
to stay
disappears.
on
Yeah,
and let
yeah,
you know that there are towns. Your
yeah,
hunch was exactly right.
yeah, yeah.
And it
Well,
just, the question was a great question, and
oh
that's
yeah,
one of the
yeah,
things that the Alliance likes to do and that I'm curious about. And
yeah.
so figured I'd
Okay.
just look you up. All
All
right.
right. All right. Well,
Thanks.
thank you,
Good
Maggie.
meeting
It's good to
tonight.
hear from you. Yeah. Happy New Year.
Yeah, same here. You
Okay.
too. Take
All
care.
right. Bye.
Bye.